For this demonstration, I'm going to use the banana because it uses the burnt sienna and it uses some green. Let's see what we can achieve with those colors. I have mixed up some of the burnt sienna and cadmium yellow, which was the test that we did earlier. And because this is such a large shape, it's rather important that you dampen the paper before you start so that you get nice, even, flat washes in the very beginning. So I'm going to do that so that some of the moisture sits down in the fibers of the paper, which is what helps to keep the watercolor from getting a hard edge. Now, you might want to try and make sure that your water and your paint don't touch that pencil line. You can go right up to it, but you want to try and avoid it because once you paint yellow over that line, you will not be able to erase it. And I have done this pretty light. I've erased a lot of it, but it's still showing up quite a bit. All right, so we're still going to use our puddle technique in order to get this flat wash. We want to start fairly light, so I'm going to dilute this color down a little bit more for our basic tea wash and test. That looks like it's going to be quite light. So we'll go a little darker because this yellow has a lot, this banana has a lot of color to it. So again, you want to hold your board at an angle that's enough to give you the gravity so that your puddle continues to move down as you're painting. And we'll start at one end. Make sure you maintain that puddle. Very important in order to get a nice flat wash. And change the angle of your brush. When you have a large area to fill, you can work with the side of the brush a little bit more, and as you get towards the edges, you might want to hold the brush a little bit more vertically so that you can control how that edge gets handled. And you can see I still have a puddle. If I run out of puddle, I add more. That is the key to a flat wash. Don't leave any of it laying around anywhere, and it should move down with gravity very nicely. Always remember to replenish. You can see me dipping my brush and pushing that puddle down away from the area that is flat. And wash. Don't go back into this once you've got it down because you see something that maybe you missed, because it starts to dry, and as soon as it starts to dry, you're going to end up with a problem. Now, as you get closer to the bottom or to the finished edge where you want to stop, you don't have to have quite so much puddle. Because you will be finishing rather quickly. So I'm going to put this yellow tea wash down over the entire subject. And then start drying my brush off. Do not clean the brush. Do not clean the brush. Let this dry, and then we'll do a second wash on here. So this is your first step. The next step in the process is to put in some of our shadow colors. And what I've done is I've mixed the yellow and burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine blue, which is the same blue that I'm using for the greens. There's green in this area, which you'll see on the photograph in the film, and then there's a shadow along this edge here. So this, I'm going to dampen the paper just slightly in this area, beyond where I think I need it. And then I'm going to take my shadow color and test before I move ahead. And I'm going to run some of that color right along this edge of the fruit. And because this needs to be softened edge, I'm going to clean my brush with water and go in right away and soften that edge. And I may have to go in again, but I'd rather be a little bit more cautious than to work it all at one time. Again, I'm cleaning my brush and just barely touching the edge of that stroke. So I'm going to let that be and then come back. There's another area here where I could add a little bit of shadow. First, I'm going to dampen the surface just a little bit and then add a little color and actually bring it down into the stem. And here on this side, I'll soften the edge, and I'll even soften the edge a little bit on this side, just barely touching it. Now this is very early on in the process, so we don't want to go too far. We can add a little bit more color. I've thinned out the paint so that it's even lighter than it was before. And then I'm going to wait because I want to put in some of this green on the lower part of this fruit. So as you can see, I've continued to add more value in order to better define the structure of this banana and to get the shaded areas appropriately darkened. I will continue to do this with further colors, but this is our basic form for the structure of the banana at this point. Now I'm going to think about adding some greens to the tip here and to this section of the banana where it's still a little green. So I'm going to wait for this to dry a little bit before I go back in with the greens. The next layer I'm going to add is this green layer at one end of the banana, actually at both ends of the banana, and I'll mix up a nice kind of a yellowy green. And I'm going to actually work slightly damp where I think I need the color. So I'm not going to entirely cover this whole thing with water again. Make sure you have enough paint in your brush when you do something like this so that you don't end up with dry areas or that you're forcing the color to go where you want it to go and you don't have enough in your brush. I'm just going to soften this edge a little here. It's not aligned. Now we can come back in and detail it a little bit more towards the end of the painting. As soon as you see it starting to dry up on you, soften those edges. Don't wait. And don't try to make it do something it doesn't want to do. You're better off if you're patient. And if you miss a few spots, wait till it dries before you go back in. It works much better if you are taking it a little slower. We're going to add a lot more yellow to this, so some of the green will be toned down as we progress with the painting. Feather that edge there so that it becomes a blended edge rather than a distinct shape. Some of this stuff will be evened out and adjusted in the dry brushing step towards the end of the painting. We've got a long ways to go here. We've got a lot of color yet to put in. It's coming along. Okay, we're at a point now where we can start to put in some more yellows and enrich the surface local color of the subject. So I'm going to, again, slightly dampen the surface, just slightly. I just barely touch it with the water, just to give it a little bit of flow. Everything should stay in place pretty nicely. So then we'll start to add some nice yellows in here. Going over just about everything. And work fairly quickly so you don't get any blotchiness. Make sure you have a good well of color that you can get into right away. Now, yellow is pretty forgiving, as you know from when you were doing your charts. It's pretty easy to blend the yellows. So I'm figuring this area here is my highlight area, and I'm just going to feather that yellow in a little bit more while it's still slightly damp. And I'm going to put a little bit more yellow up in this area so that we start to define the structure of this. Now, this is still in early stages of development. This is going to require a bit more work yet. We need to develop the values here. We need to develop the values here. On the tip of this, we're getting there in terms of the color. And I may end up putting a little bit more green in this area. It looks like it could use it. So we'll wait for this to dry. And then we'll put another layer of green. So we're doing a little bit of glazing here. And eventually we'll get to the point where we want it to look the way it should as a finished piece.